Hello. This is a sermon for the 19th of June 2022. That's the 12th in Ordinary Time, Year C. The readings are 1 Kings 19, 1 to 4 and 8 to 15, and Luke chapter 8, verses 26 to 39. Elijah was depressed. He had won a terrific victory on Mount Carmel over the 400 prophets of Baal single-handedly. Their blood had been spilled and their influence over Israel wiped away. Queen Jezebel, their sponsor, looked about to topple and flee back to Sidon. So Elijah ran all the way back to Jezreel to wait for the abdication and plan his victory parade. But it never came. Jezebel stood firm. And suddenly, Elijah was running for his life. From his confidence, even cockiness perhaps, of pouring water over his offering before asking God to set it alight, Elijah had plunged into deepest, darkest depression. He was now self-absorbed, self-pitying, and incapable of seeing beyond his cloud of despair. Nothing was right. He was alone and wanted to be alone, so he could plunge more self-destructively into the abyss. So he chased off his servant so that he could not try to offer comfort. Depression distorts your view of life. Your judgment stops working. Everything loses its value. Treasures become worthless. Victories become meaningless. Help becomes criticism. Depression is like a prison, but the bars are in your mind. Yet they can seem as strong as steel, and sometimes the only escape possible looks to be suicide, as Elijah contemplated in Horeb. Depression turns everything into being about you. Elijah felt as if he was the only true Israelite left, and that the whole future of Abraham's faith rested upon his shoulders. When in depression's dungeon, you are in solitary confinement. This is a cautionary tale for all religious people, especially those busy in the life of the church. Faith can sometimes crumble to dust. Even the strongest vocation can wither like a plant in the hot sun. Perhaps the problem really started with Elijah's enthusiasm. Perhaps his zeal for God was not quite what it should have been. Were his expectations realistic? Were they truly from God? Or were they the product of his own hubristic ambition? The mockery Elijah pours on the prophets of Baal, and the way he poured water over his sacrifice before asking God to set it alight. Was that all really necessary? That sounds more 19th century than 21st century to us. Having all his opponents put to death. Did he have to go that far? That sounds more medieval than 21st century. But Elijah was a man of his times. His concept of acceptable behaviour is not ours, as many of our ways will be found unacceptable by people living after us. But was Elijah's zeal turning into arrogance? Did he underestimate Jezebel's resilience and therefore couldn't cope when, for about the first time in his life, God had not done what Elijah wanted? We can't be sure in Elijah's case, for we weren't there. But we can ask ourselves, have we presumed outcomes and successes for our faithful service that are realistic and scriptural? Or have our anticipated successes sometimes been the product of our own egotistical imaginations? We all know of fervent followers of Christ who have quickly disappeared and lost all interest when things didn't go their way. Seed on stony ground comes to mind. I frequently meet members of the church who are sinking into depression at the state of the church. Many ministers feel this way, myself included on some days. But I know it's not just ministers. Many have given so much over so many years for so little effect. If you are feeling that way yourself, take comfort in knowing that you are not alone. Take comfort from the fact that you have a right to feel that way. The historical age of modernism through which we have lived has been like trekking across a barren desert for many parts of the church. But like Elijah, we need to find the will to break out of our prison of despondency. In the dungeon of depression, we are rendered unable to do even what we can do. Even achievements we could reach will remain beyond us, and we cut off the chances of future growth for those who are coming along behind us. So let us ease up on ourselves and allow God to take the weight. After all, Jesus promised a lighter yoke, not a burden that would crush the life out of us. Elijah was angry with God, but not being able to take his fight to God, he turned his anger onto himself. It very nearly cost him his life. In our passage from Luke chapter 8, verse 26, Jesus is confronted by another man imprisoned in mental anguish. Once again, we note that he is alone, isolated physically, socially, and ritually by living in a graveyard outside the town. We don't banish the mentally ill to graveyards nowadays. We just leave them on the streets for the police to deal with. Not that mentally ill people are always amenable to help from any quarter. Once again, the man rejected offers of help. Those who tried to keep him clothed and safely at home in the town could not keep him from running off again to the graveyard. Jesus helps the man by entering into his world. This is what incarnation is about. True incarnation does not mean that Jesus, because he was the Son of God, had a working knowledge of nuclear fusion and the jet engine, but pretended not to have. Nor was he a trained psychiatrist. True incarnation means Jesus was born into the first century world, truly, like any one of us born into our place in history. So Jesus uses the language of his culture and takes action according to the understanding of his age. The important thing is that Jesus was able to do something for this man and that he wished to do it. According to the understanding of his time, such mental conditions were caused by demons. So Jesus gets rid of the demons. Demons were known to need bodies to possess, and when not possessing a body, lived out in the desert. Demons could be destroyed by water. Therefore, Jesus sends the demons into the pigs, which then charge over a cliff and are drowned. The man is restored immediately to his rightful mind. He is clothed and sits in conversation with Jesus. So, what are we supposed to learn from this story? Luke, who was a doctor, presumably had more than its interesting medical aspects in mind. Well, it seems to me that the mental disorder of the man is a symbol for humankind itself not being in its rightful mind. Through sin, humankind is estranged from God and resistant to offers of divine help. Like the man in his nakedness, humankind has lost its rightful dignity. Like the man alone in the graveyard, humankind feels existentially alone and estranged from each other and living a life that is far from what God hopes for and what God offers to us. Like the efforts of the townsfolk to help this man, which have failed, so too the prophets of old have tried and tried again to help steer the nation back towards spiritual health. But now that Jesus has come, there is one at last who has the power and authority, even over the demonic of this world, to bring healing and wholeness once again. Humankind is still not in its right mind. Do we need more proof than we already have before our eyes and filling our history books? We are poisoning our world on which life depends. We kill and maim to get what we want. After all these generations, we still have not developed an economic system that is fair to all participants. Despite our scientific progress, we still walk in fear of mental illness. It was just the same back then. The townsfolk, upon seeing what Jesus had been able to do for this poor man, feared Jesus more than they fear the illness and asked him to leave. Many things have changed between our world and the world we see in the Bible. But one thing is still the same. Humankind is still not in its rightful mind, and yet sends away the only one who has the power and the will to help. Amen.